For 30 years, I set alarms for someone else's pills, measured insulin by hand, and balanced bills on a nightstand crowded with thermometers, until a neighbor pressed play on a 12-second clip, and the life I'd built folded like paper. In that shaky phone video, my bedridden husband hefted a humming generator into a pickup, laughed with a woman half his age, and jogged back for the cooler he swore he couldn't lift, while my heart learned the weight of betrayal. You're watching Revenge Files. Subscribe for a new twist daily. I kept the pill organizer even after the video, as if tiny plastic boxes could anchor me to a version of reality that didn't wobble. The organizer had days stamped in blue. I had habits stamped deeper. 6 a.m. count, 8 a.m., blood pressure, noon soup. Mark was always between good days or waiting on the next appointment. My life had been calibrated to his pain scale. We married in August 1994 and moved into a square, brown-sided house on Laurel Avenue in Columbus, Ohio. Back then he was lean and funny, a line cook who smelled like pepper and heat. A year later he had a back injury, then a spiral of diagnoses. The words were big and blurry. Degenerative this, chronic that, neuropathic maybe. I learned to translate pain into tasks. I learned to ask questions with a pen in my hand. Bills multiplied. Meetings with caseworkers replaced vacations. We installed a ramp I painted the color of wet driftwood. I built my hours around rides to physical therapy. His Social Security disability check came on the third Wednesday, $1,841 a month, when it finally settled. The long-term disability policy added around $1,200. My library clerk pay covered groceries if I worked every shift I could grab. The math felt almost moral. I did not resent him. I resented the clock. On May 10, 2024, the clock bit me back. Our neighbor, Nina Alvarez, waved me over to her porch as I returned from the pharmacy with a brown paper bag of meds. "Hannah, something you should see," she said, like the words had to pass an inspection before leaving her mouth. She turned her phone and pressed play. The first frame was our driveway, drawn from the HOA camera at the end of the cul-de-sac. It showed Mark in the light he avoided with me, sunny, unburdened. He lifted a generator into the bed of a red F-150, hopped down, and jogged. A woman in a cropped Ohio State sweatshirt clapped her hands. He grinned. The timestamp read 2:11 p.m. 2 hours earlier, he'd called me at the circulation desk, whispering that his lower back was a tearing fire and begging me to pick up his prescriptions early because he couldn't stand. I'd spoken to our supervisor to leave. I'd apologized to a patron with a stack of biographies. I'd promised myself a nap between soup and meds because good wives who love hard need rest. But then, I watched it again, slower. The woman in the sweatshirt had a brown ponytail and a tattoo on her left forearm, a star and a wave. She handed Mark a cooler like a nurse handing a scalpel. He took it without flinching. At 2:12 p.m., my husband rolled his shoulders and lifted his arms as if loosing a rubber band from his chest. I heard the pharmacy bag crinkle in my hand. Nina touched my elbow. "I didn't want to get in your business," she said, "but the HOA asked for volunteers to monitor the new camera rotation after the rash of break-ins. I saw your truck and flagged it because I thought, oh, they're going somewhere fun at last. Then I remembered, he always says he can't stand." The video ended. I did not scream. I thanked her. I said probably a good day. I said thank you for thinking of me. My voice was the voice I used at the reference desk when people asked where the bathrooms were. At home, Mark was in the recliner, his face arranged in the gentle pallor of a saint with low blood sugar. "Rough one," he murmured. I set the bag beside his water. I aligned the labels to face him. "What time did the pain hit?" I asked. He closed his eyes and said, 12:40. I couldn't breathe. I nodded. Then I asked him if he had seen Nina today. He frowned. "Why, she's still mowing on Thursdays?" I said yes. I went to the kitchen and took a breath that had edges. My heart didn't pound, it calculated. The organ knew its job. I didn't confront him that night. I counted pills, plated soup, and set a timer so I could listen to the news from the laundry room. I folded towels in a square tighter than Faith. That's not the brave version of me, it's the precise one. Brave would come later, when precision had something sharp to hold. The next morning, I went to the library an hour early and printed what I could without leaving breadcrumbs. Our bank statements for the last 6 months. The electric bill, the calendar I kept online with every appointment. I printed 8 photos from Facebook where the woman with the tattoo was tagged. Her name, it turned out, was Carrie Platt. She worked at Lakeview Marine and RV 20 minutes east, where the red F-150 appeared in 3 of her posts, a sunburnt badge. In one short video from April, she filmed a man in a black ball cap lifting a boat battery. Only his hands and forearms were visible, but I would have known that thin white scar near the wrist anywhere. I had kissed that scar after stitches in 2003. I started a file folder and wrote the date across it in black marker. The ink did not bleed. That afternoon, I called the hospital billing line, then our disability insurer, Mid-States Mutual. I asked for the fraud reporting webpage and listened to hold music that sounded like pre-recorded apology. I read the instructions 3 times. They did not ask for my name, they asked for facts. I had facts. I had paper. One problem, paper fuels fire as well as justice. I knew what would happen if I filed, and they cut him off quickly. The house, our house, had a $980 monthly mortgage we could barely manage even with his checks. I had kept us afloat 1 year by cashing out a modest IRA my mother left me when she died, losing $9,300 in penalties and nausea. Another year I sold her walnut dining table for $800 to a flipper who promised to love it. Love costs money. So does fear. At the library I watched the video again between shelving carts. At home I watched him. He moved with a rehearsed stiffness when I entered the room. It became theater. I learned new lines. 2 days later, I found the first direct transfer to Carrie, $400 via Zelle, Memo Yard. Our yard was mowed by a college kid for $30 a week. I printed it. The transfers had rhythm. $400 on Fridays every other week. I marked the dates with a yellow highlighter. Then I cross-referenced with his pain diary, the one he made me fill when his doctor asked him to track symptoms. On 3 of those Fridays he had marked flare. My hand had written it. I underlined my own handwriting with a ruler. At night I tested sentences in the mirror. I know, show me your phone, are you in love? The sentences felt like boulders I'd never lift, so I lifted smaller ones. I called legal aid and made an appointment. I gathered my marriage certificate, tax returns, and the original mortgage note. I counted out the bills due by the 20th. I moved my paycheck deposit into a new account at a credit union across town, a business-like betrayal. I put the new debit card behind my library card. And then I made one call I dreaded, the Social Security Office of the Inspector General hotline. I wrote down the case number the woman gave me. She read it back. Her voice was unsentimental. I clutched a pen as if it could steady the room. But then, Mark started leaving earlier in the day, using my car when the truck was being temperamental. Each time he came home a little too upright, a little too bright. Then he'd remember and bend like a poorly trained actor. I watched. I counted. I recorded the mileages on a small pad I bought for 99 cents at the drugstore. He never noticed. Nina kept watching the HOA feed when it was her rotation. A week after the first video, she texted me a clip of Mark carrying a folded table under one arm and a plastic tub in the other. "You okay?" she wrote. I typed back, "Thank you." My fingers shook only when I stopped typing. In late May, I found a storage unit key on his ring, stamped Buckeye Storage C14. He always said he wore the extra keys for when the mower's stubborn. I put the key back, kissed his scalp, and waited. On June 1st, while he napped through a migraine, I took the key and drove to Buckeye Storage in the rain with the windows down, because I needed air that didn't already know the story. The unit smelled like gasoline and spring. Inside, covered with a tarp, stood a black motorcycle, the kind he used to trace with a finger in magazines. There were plastic totes with labels in a confident hand, "Not mine," "Camp," "Tools," "Fishing." There was a folding chair, clean, and a shoebox with receipts bound by a rubber band. Lakeview Marine and RV, hardware stores. A campsite in Hocking Hills, April 18th to October 20th, 2024. Each receipt had a total in blue ballpoint ink, circled. One had a small heart in the corner. I took photos. I put the box back precisely. I locked the unit. I did not cry in the car. Crying would have washed off my checklist. I drove to the river and made a list of what I needed to do before I said anything. The list had verbs: freeze, open, file, photograph, print, call, plan. One verb frightened me most: leave. I told myself I would not speak until my plan could stand without me. At legal aid, a young attorney named Reagan, with kind hair and iron grammar, gave me a map. "Does he control the money?" she asked. "Enough," I said. She nodded. "Open a separate account." "You did? Good. Gather 3 months of statements." "Check. We'll file for a protective order if you need space. We'll seek temporary orders for exclusive use of the home and restraining orders on the accounts. Keep a daily log of incidents, not feelings, incidents. Save copies in a cloud folder and a flash drive. Don't warn him. Set a date." I asked about divorce. The word didn't choke me. It sat in my mouth like a stone I might yet skip across a lake. Reagan said, "When you're ready. If he's committing fraud, that civil mess is separate, but it will color the court's view of credibility. Judges notice patterns. So do I." On June 10th, I filed the initial report with Mid-States Mutual's Special Investigations Unit, attaching the HOA video and 5 photos from Carrie's Facebook. I wrote a timeline with times and addresses. I used short sentences. I wrote like a person who would be quoted later. I included my name. I hit submit. I surprised myself by sleeping well that night. The next morning I woke before the alarm and realized my loyalty was a habit, not a law. That afternoon I asked him, "What did you do while I was at work today?" He blinked once, then again. "Little TV. Pain wasn't good." I nodded. "Want to see something?" I pressed play on Nina's video. The screen lit his face. I watched him watch himself. He didn't flinch. He went still and then sighed, annoyed. "You're spying on me now?" he said. I said, "I didn't install the camera." He said, "You don't understand my pain." I said, "I understand your hands picked up a generator." He stood up slower than in the video. "I needed to help a friend," he said. "I paid for it that night." I left a frown on my face like a bookmark. "What's her name?" I asked. He said nothing. The silence had the shape of a dare. I said I needed air and walked to the mailbox like it was a court date. Inside was a white envelope addressed to him from Mid-States Mutual. I held it like something hot and not mine. I placed it on the entry table. The next day, a gray sedan idled 2 houses down. The following week, 2 men knocked on our door and introduced themselves as investigators from the insurer. Their names were ordinary. Their questions were crisp. Mark answered like a man performing humility. He gave them permission to review his social media if it helps. They thanked us and left. He turned to me, eyes small. "You did this," he said. I said nothing and went to the bedroom to fold socks into pairs that would never share a drawer again. But then, Mid-States Mutual sent a letter dated June 27th, benefits suspended pending further review. The language was bare. They cited inconsistent activity and instructed him to appear for an independent medical examination on July 8 at 9 a.m., bring identification and sign release forms. He crumpled the letter and threw it at the trash can, missing. "We can't pay the mortgage without that," he said. His voice picked up panic like a burr. I said, "We can pay this month. After that, we'll see." He said, "Don't you dare." I said, "What am I daring you not to do?" On June 29, I filed for legal separation in Franklin County Domestic Relations Court. Reagan helped me draft the affidavit. I asked for exclusive use of the home, temporary spousal support of $700 a month from any income he had, and immediate restraint of transfers of marital funds beyond normal living expenses. I attached my timeline. I attached bank statements with the $400 Zelle transfers. I attached screenshots of Carrie's public posts. I attached the storage unit photos. I attached the HOA clip. I did not use the word exhibit. I wrote, "See attached." The clerk stamped my name. The stamp felt like a small hammer striking a bell I'd never let ring before. We got a hearing date for temporary orders, July 16th, 9:30 a.m. I served him with the papers through a process server who wore practical shoes. He called me a traitor and threw a pillow at the wall. I stood very still and thought of the ramp I painted in a color that tried not to be remembered. On July 8th, he went to the independent medical examination wearing his softest face and using a cane he'd barely touched in a year. I watched him through the clinic window walking out to meet Carrie, who had parked around the corner. They drove off together, laughing. I took a photo, the timestamp clear. Mid-roll hit like thunder. At the library that afternoon, while searching for a copy of a maintenance manual for a patron, I found something else. A GoFundMe page titled Hannah's Caregiver Relief Fund, created by friends of Mark. The banner photo was me in our kitchen, chopping carrots. The campaign description said I couldn't afford a break and needed a week near the lake. It had raised $18,240 since March. Carrie had shared it twice with hearts. Mark had withdrawn funds in 4 transfers. My name was the hook, his hand had the line. I printed everything. I shook once and put the pages flat on my desk, then under a book to make them obey. I called GoFundMe and reported the misuse. The representative sounded both kind and rehearsed. Apparently betrayal had a menu. She recorded my statement and said the trust team would review. I sent them the court filings. I sent them photos of my kitchen the way it looked that day to prove the banner image was stolen from my phone. I sent them the transfer history where his bank buried its shrug in fine print. A week later, they froze the campaign and messaged donors. I didn't show that to Mark. I kept that card for court. On July 16th, I wore a navy dress and carried a bag with exactly what I needed, and nothing extra. Reagan sat beside me in the fluorescent wait outside the courtroom. "You'll testify," she said. "Stick to verbs and dates. Let him perform. The judge will meet him there." The judge had level eyes and a patience born of hearing people try to outtalk facts. Mark went first, arguing that I had turned on him and invented stories, that my emotions were clouding the picture. He wept when he described our wedding. He tried to look at the judge through a rain of memory. When it was my turn, I held the folder like a steering wheel. I told the court how many hours a week I'd spent caregiving over the years. I described picking up prescriptions on May 10th at 12:45 p.m., a pharmacy record in hand. I described watching the HOA clip at 2:18 p.m., Nina's text in my phone. I said, "He lifted a generator into a truck bed without hesitation." I said, "He has claimed he cannot stand more than 5 minutes." I held up the Zelle statement. I said the word Carrie without my voice breaking. I said, "I am not vindictive. I am precise." Reagan asked simple questions. "Did you prepare this log?" "Yes." "How did you obtain these screenshots?" "Public posts." "Have you filed a report with the insurer?" "Yes." "Did you create this GoFundMe page?" "No." I let the facts find their own chairs. Mark's attorney, hired last minute, tried to object on relevance. The judge waved him down once, then twice. I placed the storage unit photos on the shelf before the bench in a neat line. I did not number them out loud. I had removed anything that looked like I was trying to be a TV show. The judge could count. At the end, the judge looked at Mark and said, "Words have to meet deeds." He granted me exclusive use of the home pending final orders, restrained both of us from dissipating marital assets, and set temporary support at $600 a month from any income Mark received outside his suspended benefits. He scheduled a review for September. He asked us to step into mediation later that day for a parenting plan-style meeting about property, even though our children were grown, because property can be as stubborn as toddlers. When we stepped into the hall, Mark leaned in and whispered, "You're killing me." I said, "No. I'm letting weight fall that wasn't mine." The investigators moved in their world. On August 2, Mid-States Mutual sent another letter terminating benefits effective immediately, citing surveillance that showed sustained activity inconsistent with reported limitations, and demanding repayment of $28,600 in overpaid benefits from March through July. They attached a repayment plan sheet. They CC'd the state insurance fraud unit. On August 14th, the Social Security OIG agent called me back with a voice that had edges like paper. "We've reviewed your report. I can't discuss details, but you should know your information was useful." I said thank you and sat very still on the ramp. Days layered. I changed the locks on the house within the order's permission. He moved into a friend's apartment. I kept making tea with the same kettle because memory doesn't require permission to boil. But then, he tried to access our joint line of credit that he'd once sworn we needed for emergencies, transferring $5,000 to his checking account at 11:17 p.m. The bank's fraud department called me because my number was still on the account. I told them about the court order. They froze the line. The next morning, Reagan filed a motion for contempt. I printed the bank's freeze email and tucked it into my folder, a new piece clicking into the old puzzle. Mediation yielded little beyond 2 signatures that did not touch on the page. I wasn't surprised. We set a trial date for final orders, October 2. The date looked like a gate swinging open. On September 12th, GoFundMe sent an email confirming the campaign had violated their terms. They refunded donors from the platform's guarantee and forwarded a summary to the county prosecutor with my permission. They asked if I would prefer anonymity if charges were filed. Please, I wrote. I forwarded the email to Reagan. She called me that night and said, "This helps the theme." The theme? I asked. Judges are human, she said. Themes help them remember a case cleanly. Your theme is simple. He's healthy when money waits and sick when accountability does. In late September, I took down the ramp. Not all of it, just the railings I'd sanded twice and the top plank that squeaked when rain gathered. I set the wood at the curb with a handwritten sign that said, "Free, good lumber." A young couple with paint on their jeans took it and waved. My hands smelled like cedar and something like relief. Trial day arrived gray and steady. Mark looked smaller in his suit. I felt bigger in my bones. Reagan spoke a few words that fit on one breath. "Your Honor, this marriage was built on care, and he turned it into a scheme." Then she let the documents walk. I told my story once more, shorter this time, like a closing of a circle. I handed over copies of emails from mid-states. I handed over the insurer's final letter. I handed over the GoFundMe decision. I said, "I am not asking for revenge. I'm asking for my house and for the money he used my name to pull from strangers." The judge asked me 2 questions about dates. I answered without looking at the folder. Mark spoke about love. He tried to widen the lens so our 30 years looked like a montage you score with a sad guitar. The judge kept bringing him back to weeks and dollars. When the judge read the decision, her voice did not tremble. She awarded me the house free and clear, ordering Mark to sign a quitclaim deed within 7 days. She awarded me $12,000 from the remaining joint savings and directed the bank to release it to me within 10 days under the restraint order. She ordered him to reimburse the GoFundMe donors if the platform sought contribution, and to pay me $6,400 in attorney's fees. Reagan had discounted ours, and I had charged the last of them to a credit card I'd opened alone. The judge reserved the right to adjust support pending the outcome of the fraud investigations and set a compliance review for November 15th. "Written findings to follow," she said. And they did. 8 pages on white paper with a seal that felt heavier than any ring. After the hearing, in the hall that smelled like coffee and nerves, Mark sat on a bench and pinched the bridge of his nose. "Was I so awful?" he asked, like the word could shrink crimes into impatience. I thought of the generator leaving the ground in his hands like it wanted to. I thought of his voice asking me to leave work while he lifted coolers. "You turned our marriage into a job I didn't apply for," I said quietly. "And you clocked out when you wanted to play?" He looked at me like a man who had been caught without a costume. "Who will take care of you when you're old?" he asked. I said, "Me," and walked toward the exit, each step attaching to the floor like it belonged. I changed the mailbox lock that afternoon and put a small pot of mums on the porch. I signed the quitclaim deed he brought, notarized at the UPS store because sometimes justice happens between shipping labels and passport photos. He signed too, jaw tight. I thanked the notary and kept my copy in a new folder that had nothing to do with him. When the written findings arrived, I read them twice at the kitchen table. The lines were clean and not poetic, and yet they sang. Credibility favored petitioner, pattern of misrepresentation, equitable distribution. The words didn't hug me. They shook my hand. On November 18th, the insurance fraud unit sent me a letter informing me that, as a reporting party, I might be contacted if the prosecutor needed clarification. I pinned the letter to a corkboard I bought at a yard sale. Next to it, I pinned a single photo of me at the river, hair blown wild, eyes open. Carrie never contacted me. Her Facebook turned private. Lakeview Marine and RV posted a hiring notice in October. I did not send them anything. I had already sent enough to the world. Some nights I stood on the porch and listened to Laurel Avenue settle, bugs trilling their ancient math. The house looked like itself again. I mended a loose stair tread. I changed the porch light bulb to a warmer wattage. I learned my own small hunger and fed it on a plate I bought at a thrift store with a forget-me-not painted in the center. There were days I missed the habit of service. That startled me at first. Then I realized missing is not the same as wanting. Habit is not the same as home. On a Saturday in December, I saw Nina at the farmer's market. We stood by the apples counting bruises. I thanked her again. "I only hit record," she said. "You did the rest?" I laughed, a small sound that felt taller than me. Back home, I found a letter from Social Security. It was short. They were pursuing recovery of overpayments from Mark and noted my cooperation. They did not ask me for more. I folded the letter and slid it into the corkboard with a pushpin. The act felt like installing a hinge on a door already open. I kept the pill organizer for a while longer, not to fill it, but to remind myself I could put it away. One afternoon I carried it to the trash, then stopped, rinsed it, and placed it in the donation box. Someone could use an honest container. On the first snow of January, I stepped outside and let flakes land on my open palm until they melted. Each one disappeared without my permission. That felt correct. I stood there until my skin stung and my heart softened into a shape that could hold more than proof. Months later, I still remembered the generator like an actor hitting his mark. I remembered my own pen strokes, how straight they were when I was scared. I remembered the sound my house made when I turned the bolt on the new lock. It sounded like a period. I do not replay the video anymore. I keep a still frame in a folder in case a lawyer asks, but the picture I choose to keep is different. A woman in a navy dress standing in a courthouse, facts lined in a row, voice steady, learning that revenge is not screaming in a driveway. It is a signed order that sets a life back down on its own feet. The clock still runs. I still wake early. I set a kettle instead of an alarm. I learned what thaw feels like. And when the porch light hits at certain angles, the space where the ramp was becomes a lighter rectangle on the boards, the outline of a weight I carried until I didn't, the negative of a story I finished the day a neighbor pressed play and my heart froze, only so it could unfreeze on purpose.